Okay, great. Hello and welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar on revolutionizing your fundraising efforts with AI. It's great to see familiar names, but also welcome to those of you joining us for the very first time. Before we begin, I'll just quickly mention a few housekeeping notes. Participants are in listen-only mode and the chat function is closed. But we welcome and encourage you to share your questions and comments through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar. We've allocated some time towards the end to answer some of them live. Translation is also available through closed captioning. So if you click the Show Captions button in the Controls toolbar and select your preferred language, it should work. And also all materials mentioned and the recording of this conversation will be available after the session, so be sure to look out for post-webinar follow-up. This webinar is part of the Myriad USA series on sharing best practices in fundraising, designed to help nonprofit professionals worldwide enhance their fundraising practices and learn from each other. Myriad USA facilitates giving across borders. We provide US donors with a simple and efficient platform to support nonprofit initiatives overseas, anywhere across the globe. We also partner with foreign nonprofits and offer them cost-effective solutions to receive tax-deductible gifts from donors in the United States through a service called American Friends Funds. Note that Myriad USA is a member of Myriad, the Alliance for Borderless Giving. We have sister organizations based in Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. So if you have donors in any of those countries or regions, we can help you as well. So if you wish to learn more about any of this, feel free to reach out to us at info@myriadusa.org, which you'll also see in the chat. And now, without any further ado, I'm super excited to hand it over to Mallory, who will facilitate today's discussion. Mallory Erickson is an executive coach, fundraising consultant, and the host of the podcast, What the Fundraising, aimed at supporting nonprofit leaders to fundamentally change the way they lead and fundraise. Through her signature framework, the Power Partners Formula, Mallory provides unique tools to help nonprofits fundraise more from foundations, corporate partners, and individuals. As of 2022, she had trained over 60,000 fundraisers using elements of her unique win-win framework, which combines best practices from executive coaching, science-backed behavior design, and fundraising strategy. So Mallory, take it from here.
Thank you so much to everyone at the Myriad team for having us today. We are so excited to be jumping in and having this conversation. I am really honored to get to moderate this panel and participate with two incredible thought leaders in this space. And so I don't really want to waste any other time, just me being up here. I'd love to bring up Shereese and Allison, and I'll introduce them both. So Shereese Floyd is the founder and CEO of AI Consultants for Nonprofits, an agency dedicated to making AI accessible to nonprofit organizations, businesses, education, and government entities through training, workshops, consulting, and accredited AI certification. She's also the founder of Black Women AI Art, celebrating Black women through AI-powered visual storytelling. She serves on the board of the National Association of Women Business Owners, Charlotte chapter, and organizes TEDx Mint Street in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, Shereese. I'm so excited for you to join on this panel today. And then Allison Fine is a trailblazing force in the realm of technology for social good. Her engaging presentations inspire audiences to embrace technology as a tool for positive change and provide actionable strategies for harnessing its potential. She's written 4 books, I have no idea how, on the ways that digital technologies can improve social change efforts and the challenges that come from these changes. Allison currently serves as the president of Every.org, a tech for good nonprofit that makes online giving easier and more meaningful. Thank you both so much for joining me on this panel today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So I have had the honor of getting to learn from both of you over the last few years, as I don't consider myself sort of a technologist, but found myself helping to lead the Fundraising.AI initiative. And I'll put the framework for everyone in the chat at some point as well, but really thinking about how AI continues to revolutionize various sectors, and the nonprofit world being a unique an important use case for how we think about both the responsible and beneficial use of AI, and how we think about applying it to our work in a way that preserves the authenticity and sacredness of fundraising when it's done, with care and with really sort of relationships at its core. And I remember when I first started to really learn about what was happening in the AI space, probably only 18 months ago for me, not for the two of you, which is why we get to learn from you today. I started to realize how important it is for us to have our own conversations around what this looks like, both inside the sector and in fundraising particularly, because what we do and how we work with folks is different than other sectors. And so we can't just have trickle down processes or frameworks for things, because donor trust is so critical to the health of our sector. And because truly, one of the things I've noticed is that everyone who's on this webinar, the folks in this sector, are so justice oriented or morally oriented, that a lot of the questions and concerns that come up around AI really create more of a stopgap for folks in terms of how they're willing to engage, out of fear that they could be using it irresponsibly or in a way that could be, harmful down the road. So I'm excited for us to jump into all of this today, from how our organizations using AI to revolutionize their fundraising, to how we think about some of the ethics and the responsibility around it. So enough from me. Let's dive in. I feel like, just to level set a little bit with everyone here, it would be great if we just started with a few examples of how organizations are successfully integrating AI into their fundraising strategies. And I know the range here is massive, so I'm wondering if we can think of sort of like a beginner level, and then maybe more of a intermediate level, or like a basic use case. Does anyone want to start with that basic example?
Sure, I'm happy to begin. And thank you, Mallory, and thanks to our friends at Myriad USA for inviting me to share today. Every.org is just so thrilled with our partnership with the fiscally sponsored projects of Myriad USA. I think at a very basic, the first thing we need to unwrap, Mallory, is that AI is a lot of things. It's not one thing. Now, I know a lot of people began to pay attention last year because of generative AI and ChatGPT, but AI is being baked into every parts of organizations right now, right? When you're buying a CRM, Salesforce, whatever, AI is being built into that. It's built into your finances. It's built into your hiring, screening software. So for fundraising, we need to know a lot about where and how AI is being baked into products, and where and how we can add it to create more value. I think at a very basic level, there are two places where we're seeing nonprofits of all sizes, from very small, from one-person shops to, ginormous organizations, begin to tiptoe into using AI. And that is, the first use case is around chatbots, to be able to use a chatbot on your website to clear out a huge number of rote questions that you get. And that's where AI is really good right now, on the rote tasks, right? The tasks that don't require ingenuity or new thinking into it. So when you have a chatbot that can help someone get an immediate answer to, is my donation tax deductible? Yes, right. Are you open on Sundays? Yes. All of those questions that come up over and over again that can save staff time. That's great. And the other area is using generative AI for helping to create proposals. But always, Mallory, with human beings being the reviewer of those things before they go out the door, right? We have to stay deeply human-centric and add value with AI to help us craft communications, but to make sure that we're always the last eyes on it before it leaves the shop. So those are two areas where we see nonprofits beginning to really embrace the use of AI to raise money.
Yes, thank you for those. And thanks for backing us up for a second too, to sort of explain, because you're right, that word AI has both become everything and nothing sometimes in terms of how people are, understanding or even thinking, should I adopt AI, without realizing that they have been adopting AI because it is integrated now into all of these tools. Shereese, I'm wondering for you if there are other use cases that you feel like would be really helpful for folks to sort of understand the breadth of how organizations are using this in their fundraising.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm gonna go a little bit deeper, piggyback on what Allison said when she mentioned proposals, because in my work, grant writing and proposals is the gateway into generative AI. And I will, the way that I come to it, and that's how I ended up being how I ended up being here, working in a nonprofit at the time as a marketer who was then tasked with doing grants and needing something to survive. And AI happened to be that thing at the time. And so what I see is a lot of people entering into that portal because people are looking for a specific lifeline. Yes, we have to always raise money. It's always on our lips all the time. But the people who are actually doing the work to raise that money are sometimes stretched very thin. And so when you spoke earlier about that moral aptitude that comes with this work, that is something that never turns off. This is a sector that runs on passion. That passion never turns off. And because of that, you have people who are stretched very thin and who are at the end of their rope, and AI becomes that lifeline, specifically around grant writing. And that is one of the major use cases that we see, showing people how to use it and use it effectively. When I did it, I wasn't using it correctly, if there's a correct, but I wasn't using it ethically, I will say that, because I was trying to survive. And I see people doing that because they're trying to get through their job. And so we're asking them to take some steps back and understand how to use it responsibly, and building in that moral code within that use case that allows them to use it and to raise money and then to save the sanity of the people who are doing it.
Thank you for sharing your own experience that way, because I think that's so helpful for folks to hear that, number one, you could be on this stage talking about how to use AI and at one point weren't using it correctly, sort of however we define that. And just to give everybody some grace in their learning journey, and knowing that even if you didn't understand how to use it correctly yesterday, and even if on this webinar you have a moment of like, that you can overcome that. And so I'd love actually to just piggyback on that topic, because I know we wanted to talk about what the responsible and ethical use of AI means in the context of fundraising. And so I feel like this is a great moment to do that. Do you want to start that off, Shereese, and then we'll go to Allison?
Yeah, that topic in and of itself, responsible, ethical, beneficial, all the words that we group in there together, use that in and of itself is huge. And we often think, I'm going to talk about it in two ways, because we often miss this one element of it. But ethical, responsible use, specifically when you're talking about fundraising, is everyone is on this webinar. Let's just go ahead and raise our hands and declare that we will not put personal information into these systems. Personal information being social security numbers, budgets, any identifying information that, these are smart systems that can lead you somewhere. So let's just agree that we're not going to do that. But when you are using these tools to raise money or in any aspect, you have to be aware that what you are really getting from it is the ability to think for you, but not necessarily, you don't want it to be able to have your information. A lot of them are taking your information to train others. You want to make sure that anybody who has entrusted you with their information in a nonprofit, that you are using it responsibly, that you take care of their information. A lot of nonprofits don't even disclose the fact that they're using AI. And that is because of what we talked about earlier, where a lot of these tools have AI already baked in. So I'm sure we'll get down that road as well. But the second way that I want to talk about in terms of what we aren't thinking about in terms of responsible use is sometimes that call is coming from inside the house. And what I mean by that is that we look at it as if the tool itself is supposed to be responsible for saving us, which is not true. Like, we have to save ourselves in this case, but we also use the tools internally in a way that sets up this dynamic with the people internally who are using the tools, where some people have access and some people don't. And maybe we'll get to that conversation a little later as well. So ethical, responsible, beneficial use is, as you said earlier, is starting to mean to me the same. It could be everything and nothing at all, because it isn't really, every organization has to define what that means. Every person has to define what that means, because we all have a different moral code and we all have a different risk tolerance. And so it's working within the confines of what your organization sets up, but also being able to live with it within yourself. I hope that answers it, because I can get on a soapbox about that one. But
no, there's so much here, and we could have had the whole panel just on this topic. Allison, I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts on what responsible and ethical use means, and also if you want to hit on that piece around how can organizations ensure they're adopting AI in ways that respect donor privacy, which Shereese talked about a little bit, reduce bias and maintain trust? Like, what does that look like, even given the sort of diversity of organizations having these conversations internally?
So a bit of a ginormous topic. Let's see what we can do in 2 minutes. The first thing, Mallory, that I want the folks who are joining us today to hear is it is really important that you go slowly and carefully here. If we were talking about social media 10 years ago, my co-author and dear colleague Beth Cantor and I were telling people, jump in, right? You got to get in the water and test it out and try it out. And this time, we're really cautioning people of, hang on a second, you really need to understand what it does to people and systems when you automate functions, meaning that you're having technology do things that only humans could do until 5 minutes ago, right? And the dangers are, these systems come with their own biases baked in. So for instance, if you're using an AI-powered system to screen resumes, chances are it was created and coded by white men to look for white men, right? And the problem is, once you've implemented that into your organization, Mallory, you don't see who got left out. You only see who got left in. Mm-hmm. So unless you're really asking smart questions of the companies of how have you mitigated against bias and how can we mitigate against bias, right? How can we test these systems slowly, find out who tried to get in and didn't get in, right? Find out where the bias is, because there is going to be bias in here, and mitigate for it, or at least try to solve for it. These things are going to happen to your organizations without you knowing it, right? You're going to use a wealth screening tool that is biased towards wealthy white people living in certain zip codes, right? So step one is to understand how these tools were created and how they work, what you're going to be missing, what you're going to be adding to your organization. And step two is to remember this is what my friend Nick Hamlin at Global Giving calls hot sauce, not ketchup, little bit, right? We're looking right now to add AI to organizations to solve what I call exquisite pain points, right? Those bottlenecks within your organization that are sucking up all of your time or, making sure you can't do anything else. So Shereese, it might be your staff is answering the same questions over and over and over again, and that's a time suck for you. Or your development staff is spending 80% of their time trying to draft proposals, and that's just not a good use of time. So you find an exquisite pain point, you make sure you're using tools that align with your values, right? And vendors who align with your values. You test them slowly to figure out exactly what's happened when you don't have people doing these functions anymore. What's happened to your staff because they're doing a different job now? What's happened to your community if they feel they can't get to people as easily as before? Have a pilot and then grow from there.
Okay, I don't know about anyone else, but I was taking some notes. I love that. I love that exquisite pain point piece and really starting with the problem, right? I'm sure we've all gotten emails and questions these days of, I want to get some AI for my nonprofit. Where do I get some AI? And that we're fundamentally starting at the wrong point there, right?
The telescope is switched over. You do not start with a tool. You start with a human problem and figure out where AI can help you to become more, not less human. And we're going to get to the dividend of time in just a little bit, Mallory. But please, please, please don't jump to the shiny object and start with a tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. This is hot sauce, not ketchup. I really like that analogy and sort of all of the care mentioned in that. Yeah, I'm holding myself back from going into that next question around ROI because I think it'll be more helpful after we talk a little bit about how organizations should consider, like when they're considering integrating AI into their fundraising efforts. I'm sure folks are coming to this conversation at multiple phases in their journey. And I also just want to say, actually, to double click again on what Allison just said, this is a real like international audience listening to this webinar right now. And so those pieces around bias and representation and what's inside your data and how those reproduce, any sort of inequities or bias when AI is based on that data, I think is so critically important as you think about application of these tools across country lines or continent lines. And we've even seen in my home, my daughter speaks Spanish, and my husband has taught her some voice dictation with generative AI tools to create pictures and things like that. And it's been so interesting, the difference in results from questions when she's speaking in Spanish versus when she's speaking in English. And so it's like a real-time reflection of the way in which these tools capture the data available to them in a moment and produce a result rooted in the patterns and bias and things that are inside those pools of data that they're pulling from. So I really wanted to highlight that you said that. So thinking about organizations considering integrating AI into their fundraising efforts, what are some of the key capacities and infrastructure that need to be developed across the entire organization to really support that successful adoption? Shereese, you alluded to this a little bit before, so do you want to kick us off there and then we'll go to Allison?
Yeah, fundraising doesn't happen in a vacuum. Everything that's going on in the capacity of a nonprofit is really to keep that nonprofit going, fundraising is what everybody actually is doing to be able to do that, no matter what your job title is. And so what this is for me, which is, it's hard to kind of, you know, encapsulate all of it, but it's beyond logging on to ChatGPT. It is beyond just going into a system and asking it to write you an email or a fundraising proposal. It's beyond that. We are at a space where, because there is so much that can happen with this tool that can go all the way wrong, you have to start from the top down and across. Because when you have different departments who have access to a tool, and it is not something that the whole organization is trained on, and it is not something that a policy is built in around it, and it is not something that people have an understanding of what this tool is and is not, that is a recipe for disaster, which internally, once you go down, that means externally, there is no money coming in. So this infrastructure has to be around talking about it from an organizational perspective, not a department perspective and not a function perspective. This is understanding that you have to have guardrails and a policy in place before you start this thing. And just because if you have people in the organization who are using AI and there is no formal policy, just because there's not a formal policy doesn't mean that you don't have a policy. Because once someone starts using it without a policy, oh, there's a policy in place. It's just not written down. And so to get to this, because we start thinking about, oh, it's a policy, oh, it's a strategy, we start thinking like, oh my gosh, this is too much, it's too much. And you just want to stay into that space of, I'm just going to log on to ChatGPT and do my thing. It's really, it's not easy, but it's accessible to get there. And it really starts with 3 simple questions once you start. What part of this organization is going to remain human? What part of this organization will be human and AI? And what part of this organization will be AI? When you start there and start outlining the different functions within the organization, that starts putting together what a policy is. And now you can start putting together the type of tools that you might use. It's a lot more detailed than this, to Allison's point as well. It's beyond just a tool, because generative AI or AI is a tool until it becomes a process, until it becomes a system. So take it off the pedestal first, and then sit down and decide, what is it about this organization that needs to be collaborative with AI, or the part that we it's all human, it can't be, and what are we comfortable with delegating to AI? And now within each of those buckets, you can now decide what specific functions within each one of these, which ones are soul sucking, which ones are generative, where's the resistance? If you could have an assistant today, what would that assistant do? And look within those functions to decide how a tool will come in, and then what are the parameters that you're going to set around that tool. If you can stay methodical in that process, you can get a policy built fairly quickly, and understand it's a living document, and you have to have sanctions and consequences and all of that stuff built in. Because let me tell you, you can have a ban on AI, but I promise you, as long as people have one of these, it's coming in. So people are bringing their own AI to work. And so you have to be proactive around that. It's bigger than just, let's turn on ChatGPT or let's turn on Claude or what. It's bigger than that.
Yep. Amen. Well said, Shereese.
Okay.
Yeah, Allison, what are your thoughts coming up?
I have a lot of thoughts, Mallory. So
Perfect.
My biggest fear with AI and fundraising is that organizations will use it to supersize our current system of transactional hamster wheel. I can't think of a non-profane word, emails that we're getting for fundraising. We currently have what I call the leaky bucket system. of everyday donor fundraising. This was created 60 years ago by people who gathered up large lists of names and addresses to sell stuff, to sell magazines, to sell, anything. And that turned into direct mail fundraising. And the idea was you're going to mail out, huge number, you're going to get a 3% response on that. You're going to lose money on that first mailing, but don't worry, those donors will be with you for a while, and the total value of those donors will be huge for you. And the reality is today, I don't know what it was in the beginning, but today, 80% of donors fly out of that bucket almost the minute that they arrive, right? And you're left with just 20% to get from year 1 to year 2, and then it diminishes from there. This is a huge part of what makes our organizations panic every day about getting cash in the door, right? Because this system is so fundamentally broken. And what's even worse, Mallory, is they're being advised by consultants and people who live on transactional funding and volume to do it all over again year after year. That system doesn't work. And worse of all, not only is it broken for organizations, it's broken for donors. We have 20% fewer people giving to a nonprofit cause today than they were in the year 2000. So you've got high burnout and exhaustion within organizations, and you've got a huge distaste from donors saying, we hate those emails. We're unsubscribing as fast as we can, right? So AI has the promise and the possibility of being able to create a relational model of fundraising for everyday donors at scale. If you ask development people, are you a good relational fundraising? Sure, I take my major donors out to lunch. I want to create a system at every.org where a $25 donor feels as good as your $10,000 donor. And we can do that by customizing stories using AI to what people are interested in and the form they're interested in, by thanking people better for their gifts, right? Maybe I love videos. I won't tell you how much time I spend on YouTube, but it's a lot. And my mother loves text, and we can have thank yous go out in those forms to people. And to talk to people without asking in every communication, which just drives me nutty, right? So I think the hope of using AI for fundraising is we can get off of that transactional hamster wheel and pivot to a relational model at scale that brings up that donor retention rate 20%, maybe we can get it to 30%, right? With just that little leap would allow staff to take a deep breath and allow us to treat donors like real human beings with multiple interests and their own social capital and intellectual capital that they want to bring to causes.
Oh my gosh, there's so much in there that I'm trying to like really let sink in. And I hope everybody who's on this webinar the combination of what you and Shereese just said, I think is so important, because what I'm taking away is like something Woodrow Rosenbaum, the chief data officer at Giving Tuesday, says a lot is we don't want AI to just help us do more of the bad things faster, right? Or more of the wrong things faster. And I think one of the things that is so I feel the most concerned about with AI is just this dial that can be turned up. But if we're turning up that dial on these transactional practices, then what are the downstream effects? And to your points, right? So many of us as fundraisers, we're being measured on these annual numbers. And so it leads to these strategies that prioritize an annual, like an annual metric over potentially the downstream negative impact, like the mail example you gave, right? I think about that with AI and fundraising. Like, okay, maybe it could be used to raise a little bit more this year, but what happens to those donors next year because they were fundraised from in that way? And so those are the things that I think you're like, to your points, Allison, we have data around the fact that this is not going well in the way it's been rolled out in other environments. And so we really want to be careful and intentional and thoughtful about how are we actually using AI to do this, the craft better, creating deeper human connections by allowing some of those touch points to scale, but we're not just having it spray fire out more of the transactional practices that we see.
Well, and Mallory, this speaks exactly to the point Shereese was making about policy. Using AI is a leadership challenge, not a technical challenge for organizations, right? It's so easy to just adopt a chatbot or grab a piece of software and start pounding away at it. Big deal. You haven't changed the dynamics of your organization, right? And at the heart of using AI for me is the promise of what I call the dividend of time. This is, if we can get AI to do these rote tasks, to do the 20 to 30% of time everyone spends on administrative tasks, reconciling the budget, drafting communications, fielding rote questions, we free up time. And then the question, Mallory, is time to do what? Right. That's where the human comes in, because my greatest hope is it will be time spent building relationships, telling stories, problem solving, building community in ways we haven't had the time to do before. That's the promise of AI, not going faster, not sucking up our data, not, drafting communications we haven't looked at before they go out the door. It is about creating a next chapter of deeply relational organizations that make both staff and donors feel great.
I love that, Allison, because it's what I like to tell people all the time. We have always known how to save time. We have always known how to save money. We have not known how to save people. And AI is a unique tool that can help us in that, where it's not a tech decision, it's just a strategic decision. And it's not a strategic decision, it's a human decision. And so this part of AI, again, bigger than just logging on, if you have not taken the time to talk to your team about, or there has not been an internal conversation about how AI is going to fundamentally change the way that we work, it's already starting off wrong. Because there are a lot of internal fears that people are having about whether AI is going to take over their job, of whether if more people are get to do their job better and I don't. If you haven't worked on the change management piece, which will make implementing something like this easier, this is going to just push you off the rails. It's not magic. It doesn't fix what's already broken. The humans within the system have to do the human work and then bring in the artificial piece in order to make it a more human process. It's not the artificial piece fixing what the humans have already destroyed. That's not how any of this works. That only works in sci-fi movies, and that's not what this is. And so AI is 100% a human decision. And when we talked earlier about that bias, or not the bias piece, the ethical use coming from inside of the house, what I have seen is that there is this thing, AI can do it faster. So if it took me an hour before to do it, and now AI can do it relatively well in 10 or 20 minutes, whatever, the thing is they're piling more work on. That's not how this is supposed to go. It's not like churn out. It's let me be able to do this and take a breath And now I can get back to this mission that I love so much, that I give my all to defend. And that is that element of ethical use that we don't talk about. You can take something that took me a long time to do, I can get it done quicker and I can get it done well. But now the expectation is that I'm going to fill in that extra 40 minutes that I have with the same
Crappy stuff.
I was about to use I was about to go.
I know. It's hard to use nice language for it,
Get a
right?
little colorful with the same stuff.
Same crappy stuff.
Yes.
So much of what you both are talking about, and I'm very impressed with myself that I've gone 42 minutes and not said the word nervous system or the phrase nervous system, because I think so much about what's happening when our stress response is activated, something that is so normal for nonprofit leaders for a variety of reasons, particularly fundraisers. There's so many elements of fundraising that activate our nervous system, that turn on that stress response. And then when we're in that fight flight mode in our brain, that's where the shiny object syndrome comes from, right? Is like, or that scatteredness is like our stress response is activated. We're looking for something to soothe that stress response. We see marketing from a tool come in that says it's going to save the day. All we want is to be saved in that moment. And so we go tech first instead of problem first. And something that I love so much about what both of you guys are saying is to zoom back and start inside of you, inside of your leadership, inside of your organization, to really move back into that driver's seat before and it's hard for me as a business owner, right? I get emails every single day about how I could do something so much better if only I had this tool to do it. And if you're feeling self-doubt in that moment, it makes perfect sense to be like, oh, I want to do that better. And this thing knew exactly how I could do it better, right? And that is the power of marketing. But what I hear you both saying that I think is so important is this invitation to folks to turn that off for a second, have internal conversations, answer these questions that both Allison and Shereese have put in front of you to help guide how you're thinking about it before you sort of start to digest all of these, potential solutions, because without that center point, the marketing around those solutions is going to sway you oftentimes to make a decision based on the technology, not based on the issue at hand. Now, I know I'm saying this to a lot of folks who have way too many things on their plate, like, Mallory, where am I going to even find the time? And so I do think it's important to highlight ultimately what is, and Allison, maybe you'll kick us off with this question, like, what is the true, you started to talk about this a little bit before in terms of really the return that comes when this is done right. But can you talk a little bit about what is the true return on investment, that ROI, when folks are intentional and thoughtful about it, that they can be considering around integrating AI in this ethical, responsible, and beneficial way?
So I was in Athens, Greece last spring, Mallory, and talking at their National Philanthropy Conference, and I was so struck by the global nature of trying to do too much with too little by NGOs and nonprofits. I think it is just baked into the work that we do. We want to make the world better, and there are so many problems, and we try to do way too much, and we add programs and services. Step one in my mind, and again, it's a leadership challenge, is getting to the essence of your business and your work, right? What is the most important thing for your organization to try to accomplish? Just one thing. And how are we going to be great at that? And then what are the resources we need to do that? And that should require organizations to stop doing things, stop doing some things, take them off the plate. And I know that's really, really hard, but not everything that we do is of equal importance. One of the things I see organizations spend enormous amounts of time on reports to donors, impact reports. And I have a question. Does anybody care about your impact report? The reluctance of organizations to be in conversation with their donors about what communications do you want, in what ways, how often, how do we make you, the donors, the volunteers, your stakeholders, feel when you engage with us? There is such a sincere fear of asking those questions in our ecosystem. So we continue to send out reports, have activities, host events that frankly, if you didn't do them, nobody would care. So first step is clarity, right? And simplicity. What are we trying to do? And then how do we do that? And then to Shereese's point of a few minutes ago, where are we leading with AI and where are we leading with humans? But knowing that we're probably going to have some combination of the two, co-botting in everything that we do. Ultimately, Mallory, the ROI of using AI is to bring more joy into your work as a staff person, to bring more impact into the world, and to bring more meaning to the people, the donors and volunteers who want to contribute to your work. And you cannot do that by just layering AI onto what you're doing today. You've got to rethink your work.
Okay, thank you so much. I completely lost myself in both of your responses, and I know we have some Q&A. Okay, perfect timing. I've been seeing some of the Q&A come through, and so I'm going to pass it back to Marina to take it away.
Great, thank you, Mallory, and thank you, Shereese and Allison. I'm super excited to just straight jump into the Q&A. Folks have some good questions. And this is just a reminder, it is your last chance to submit any thoughts or comments and also contribute to the conversation with your experiences. I'm sure that might bring some light into the discussion as well, so please go ahead. But I'll begin with the first question that I actually received before the webinar that I'm sure you get asked probably often, but it would be good to hear if you have any insights or speculations of what AI will do to improve or just how it will affect fundraising practices. The question said in the next 5 years, but I would say right in the foreseeable future. Should fundraisers be afraid for their jobs? I don't think so, but what you have to say to that? Anyone, feel free.
Allison, I'll let you take this.
Sure. So here's the fact, is that most fundraisers can't get to their jobs right now, right? They're so overwhelmed with administrative tasks and with playing a game of whack-a-mole of what's coming in the door right now. They can't get to the reason why they came, which was to build relationships with donors. So rather than reducing the number of fundraisers, I think we need to invest in them and have more of them if we want to be great at relational fundraising at scale. When I started to look at AI and fundraising about 6 years ago with a grant from the Gates Foundation, my first fear was the C-suite is going to look at this as a way to get rid of headcount, right? Oh, geez, we've got, AI can draft communications, can do all of these things. What do we need people for? We need people more than ever right now to stay deeply human-centered in our work and to build those relationships with donors so that you get them to that second gift. Because if you're not getting to that second gift with donors, you're going to be on that hamster wheel of transactional fundraising forever. So my advice to fundraisers is to figure out how to get AI to do a lot of that administrative work, take the first drafts of things, free up your time to be in conversation with donors at every level every single day. If you're not talking to donors one-on-one, you're not doing your job.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question, but this is good insight. And I think what is kind of the comments that we've gotten before the webinar is precisely geared toward, how can we kind of pile on, like save time, doing these tasks that we can outsource to AI and then fit more. And I think what I hope we're kind of thinking about is precisely that. That's not the point. We're not trying to kind of, fit more admin and outstretch folks. That's not what the job is about. But anyways, I'll move on to the next question as well. This is an interesting one from an anonymous participant. We have not yet integrated AI for grant writing, as we haven't figured out the ethics around it, and also out of the fear that donors might dismiss AI-generated responses. Do you know what are the trends among donors in that regard? Are most generally accepting of AI use? And also just another question tied to that, is there a way to identify AI-generated responses? So, from the donor's perspective, whether it be individual donors, but also, foundations or something along those lines, how are they viewing, the process up to anyone?
Okay, I'll jump in on this one. I'll start with the end of it first. Are there ways to identify AI-generated content? The answer is no, not for real. Yes and no. I say it this way because there are ways you can detect it, but it is not at all anything that, what is the word I'm looking for? It's a lot of false positives in terms of you can take something completely human generated. I've done that myself, things I've written years ago, and put it into a detector, and it will tell me that it's AI generated when I know that it's not. By the same token, you can take something that's completely AI generated and put it into a detector, and it will say it's 98% written by humans. So there are algorithms within the detectors. So the answer to that is yes and no, depending on what generator or detector that you're using. I will also say in the conversations that I have had with some funders that the idea of grant writing and how they feel about AI is a little bit all over the place. I will say, as far as the ethics, if a grantor or fundraiser or whoever you're asking for money for asks if AI has been used, tell the truth. That's just tell the truth. That's part of the ethics there. Second, it is up to you when you are doing a fundraising proposal that if you are using AI to never ever just take that, copy and paste. Ever. Don't ever do that. That is just to get you to start thinking. Now, I understand fundraisers, specifically grantors, do the most with the things that they ask you, the hoops they ask you to jump through to raise money. We get it. And fundraisers are not wordsmiths. We get that too. We get it. But you don't copy and paste. So I think not only can, a detector tell, us reading it can tell when it's written, when it's not humanly written. Now, I've had funders also say to me that people who use AI to write fundraising proposals, if they can't talk about their cause without artificial intelligence, they don't deserve the money. I've heard that conversation many, many times. Here is the thing. As far as ethics, do you believe in the cause? Do you know what the impact is? Do you know what this mission is actually doing? If you do, use the tool to help you flesh out what that is, and then put your own spin on it. That's really what they're talking about. Don't copy it and paste it, because that's an AI generated response. But if you use your own human mind with artificial intelligence, the best tool that you can ever use with AI is your own critical thinking. And then you work collaboratively with the tool, that's not technically AI generated. So you have to be able to understand that the tool that's going to think for you and write for you 100%, not your real response, even if it's your real thought. So you've got to be able to work collaboratively with it. Oh, and sorry, I know I've written long. And I can't remember the exact name of the study. I know that Charian is involved in the study, something around donors' responses to AI. But within that study, donors are rooting for us and AI. They're rooting for us to get it right. And so they're not necessarily turning their back on us. They want us to get it right. But we have to be able to disclose it and use the tools effectively, responsibly.
And Mallory, if you want to add on about the report that you
It's the same report. Shereese and I are so aligned. I
Yeah,
dropped it in the
right.
chat.
Right, check it out in the chat. That good timing, right? Genius minds think alike.
Yes.
But no, this is very helpful. And also, I'll just add on. There was a question that I think hopefully you kind of also answered as well. You know, how do I, let's say if I'm drafting a thank you letter to a donor, something personalized, well, I'm not going to, or I should not, right, enter some personal information about them, right? But I'm not going to also copy and paste that. There's right a point where you come, maybe use it as a base point, and then you then reflect, okay, and personalize the letter because you want to stay authentic. You also might want to make your life simple and have a starting point, you know, with the kind of template letter, things like that. But okay, I think we have time for one more question, sort of a big question, but you know, Allison as well and Shereese, you've pointed to that about kind of the leadership challenge aspect of using AI. So if I'm in a leadership position, or if I'm really kind of in charge of thinking about those things and leading a nonprofit, where do I begin? So if I'm thinking about policies and overall kind of organizational structure, there's obviously sort of boundaries to what I know myself. So what are some of the resources? Should I go to a consultant? How do I get in, you know, really make an informed decision about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, start with Mallory's framework that she helped to develop, which is great. Beth Cantor is an amazing resource for ethical and responsible use of AI. The book we wrote together, The Smart Nonprofit, provides a lot of guidance of how to get started. And I think the really, really important thing that I hope folks will take away from this conversation is slow down, take a breath, get yourself a little bit educated on this, and think about small experiments for getting started. Do not turn your organization over to the tools, because one of the big difficulties with AI, unlike any other technology, is you can't see it at work necessarily. It's like the refrigerator humming along in the background in your kitchen. So step very carefully when you're automating things, but first step is avail yourself of the resources we have described here, and have a whole organizational conversation about what it means to have tech doing things that only your people could do until very recently.
Yeah, and I will just jump in and say, start with the people. You have to start with the people. You don't start with resources. I mean, resources are all great, but start with the people who you are in charge of leading every day. Find out what they know, find out how they feel, find out what they think, and collaboratively do that together. AI should enhance your mission. It is not there to drive your mission. And you have to know the difference. So start with your people. If you want to keep it a human process, you have to involve the humans. AI is not going to take over our humanity unless we relinquish it. And so start with the people.
Start with the people. That's a good note to end the webinar on. We're out of time, but I want to thank Shereese, Mallory, and Allison for the practical insight, might I note. I think we've learned a lot. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to answer all of your questions. Feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. And also Mallory has dropped some additional good resources in the chat. Check those out. And we value your feedback and kindly request you just take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey and any kind of post-webinar reflections. Feel free to send those. Those help us also improve future sessions and meet your needs. And this is our last webinar of the year as we're heading into kind of a pre-holiday season. We're taking a break, but we'll be back in 2025. So stay tuned for those topic announcements and participate in the survey. And that's your chance to help us develop the program for next year. And we invite you to stay updated as well by following us on LinkedIn. And as I said, feel free to connect with Mallory, Shereese, and Allison. I'm sure that they welcome that as well in those interactions. And for any remaining questions or further information, please contact us at info@myriadusa.org. Thank you again for such a wonderful session. I hope this has brought much food for thought, but also some actionable items on folks' plates as they also bring this information to their organization and their staff, and they're thinking about this on a greater scale. Thanks again, and have a good rest of your day. We'll see you next year. Okay. Bye-bye.